He didn't touch me, but the air crackled with anticipation. In the last room, a video about old train routes played on a loop, something few would stop to watch. We found ourselves in a corner where we wouldn't be noticed. I made a comment about the soundtrack, and he replied that I was missing the point. Then, unexpectedly, he looked at me and said, "This is driving me crazy. I think about you all the time." My breath caught, and I felt unsteady. "You shouldn't," I managed to reply, but he shot back, "Neither should you." But here we are. Without answering, I stepped closer. There were no questions this time. We both knew what we wanted. When our lips met, it was different, filled with warmth, desire, and the release of months of restraint. His hands slipped under my coat, fingers caressing my back, drawing near to my hips. I kissed him more intensely than I intended, trying to bridge the gap between my past self and the person I was becoming. He pulled away first, his breath shaky, with our foreheads touching. "If we keep this up," he murmured, "you won't want to stop." "I already don't," I replied. We lingered in silence for a moment before leaving the museum. Outside, the wind picked up, and I didn't care if my coat flew open. In the car, I sat quietly, my hands in my lap. He suggested a weekend trip to escape, wanting to be with me openly. My heart agreed, but my mind hesitated. That evening, my husband greeted me with wine and a novel, asking about my day. I replied it was long, and he kissed my forehead before dinner. He complimented my involvement in the community and said I looked lovely in black. Later in bed, I allowed his touch, but my mind drifted back to that gallery, recalling a different kiss and voice. Afterward, I curled up, feeling awake, knowing I would see him next weekend. In the days that followed, I kept up appearances, cooking, emailing, running errands. I seemed happy, even to my husband, who remarked on my lighter mood. Yet inside, I was lost in daydreams of him and our secret moments. I found myself in a hidden world, and the longer I stayed there, the more it felt like the only place where I could truly be me. I hadn't made any promises yet, but deep down, I was certain I'd go with him that weekend. It wasn't about running away or acting out. It was about finding clarity. I had discovered a side of myself I hardly recognized, and I didn't want to lose her. Still, even as I made plans for the upcoming trip, I reminded myself that I needed to set things right at home, or at the very least, make it seem that way. I suggested making dinner plans for Saturday night, fully aware that those reservations wouldn't be honored. I told my husband I might go visit my sister in the city. He nodded, seeming distracted and not asking for more details. I couldn't help but wonder if, on some level, he sensed what was happening, but if he did, he quickly pushed it aside. On Thursday, I met his mother, who was also my friend. She had invited me over for lunch, her casual approach as warm as ever. She chatted about her job, an upcoming vacation, and a new recipe she was eager to try. Not once did she mention him, but he felt present in every part of her house. I could still catch a hint of his scent lingering on the couch pillows, and his shoes were left near the back door. His voice echoed in my mind, and I found myself looking toward the hallway more than once. She offered me coffee, and I accepted, my hand shaking slightly as I held the cup. I told myself it was just the caffeine making me jittery. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door and asked if everything was all right. Her tone had shifted just a bit, more curious, even tender. I smiled a bit too quickly, trying to reassure her that everything was fine. She tilted her head, observing me a moment longer than usual. "You seem different lately, like you have a lot on your mind," she said. I laughed a forced laugh. "Maybe I do." She gently touched my arm and said, "Thinking can be dangerous." As I drove home, her words stuck with me, making me feel more exposed than I anticipated. That night, I packed a small overnight bag. I told my husband again about my supposed plans with my sister, kissed him goodnight, and lay next to him in the dark, heart racing and eyes wide open. The next morning, he left for work early. I waited about 15 minutes after he was gone before I got dressed, putting on the same red lingerie, a dress he hadn't seen before, low heels, and a touch of makeup I hadn't used in months. I didn't look like myself. Instead, I resembled a version of me I thought I had buried long ago. He picked me up at the edge of town, and for a while, we simply drove in silence, windows down, wind blowing through our hair. The radio played a soft, forgettable tune. About halfway to the next city, he took my hand in his. I let him take the lead as I gazed out the window, feeling a mix of anticipation and hesitation. We arrived at a quaint coastal town, peaceful and simple. We checked into a cozy bed and breakfast that had a lovely scent of lavender mingled with the salty sea air. The woman at the front desk asked if we were celebrating something special. He said we were, and I decided not to correct him. We wandered along the narrow streets, stopping for lunch by the water, where we enjoyed a bottle of wine under a large canvas umbrella. He asked me questions I had never shared before, about my childhood, my regrets, and my dreams during sleepless nights. I answered honestly, not because I owed it to him, but because I wanted to hear the truth come from my own lips for a change. He listened with a level of attention I hadn't experienced in years. He laughed at my sarcastic comments, pushed back against my cynical views, and occasionally touched my knee under the table, making it hard for me to catch my breath. We didn't kiss that day or do anything overtly romantic, but a strong connection was forming between us, something solid and impossible to ignore. That night, back at the inn, I stood in front of the mirror for what felt like ages, slowly removing my dress and taking in my reflection as if I were seeing myself anew. When I heard him gently knock on the bedroom door, I hesitated before responding. I pressed my fingers against my stomach, closed my eyes, and felt the weight of every choice that had led me to this moment. Finally, I opened the door to find him standing there, quiet and still, without a smile or a word. I stepped aside to let him in. We didn't touch. We just sat on the edge of the bed, our shoulders almost touching. The air between us was charged. "I don't want to ruin your life," he said out of the blue. I turned to him and replied, "Then don't." He gazed at me for a long moment before saying, "I want more." I wasn't sure if he meant more time, more of me, or something entirely different, but I nodded in response. That night, as we lay side by side in our clothes, whispering our truths into the dark, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. It wasn't about physical attraction. It never had been. It was about being known, being seen, being chosen. In that small rented room, away from everything I knew, I felt like I was part of something again, not belonging to him or anyone else, but to myself. We had agreed silently that this would be it. It was meant to be a final moment. We would return to our separate lives after a weekend escape. I would go back to my husband, my daily routines, and the comfort of my structured life. He would return to whatever normalcy awaited him after me. Yet, even as we said our goodbyes on Sunday, with him kissing the back of my hand instead of my lips and holding the door open without touching me, I realized he had opened a deeper door within me. By Monday morning, I found myself back in the rhythm of daily life. The kettle boiled at 7:10 a.m. and the washing machine were to life at 8:15 a.m. But everything felt different now, as if something had shifted inside me. Every night at 9, the neighbor's dog would bark as if it was on a timer. In those moments, I felt as if I was just going through the motions, as if I were a person borrowed from someone else. My movements were correct, and my smiles came easily, but they felt disconnected. My husband kissed me on the cheek, told me I looked nice, and asked if I wanted to plan anything for the weekend. I simply replied, "Let's see how the week goes." He didn't push further, but there was a part of me that had opened up in that peaceful coastal town, a part that had shared quiet moments with him in bed, without words. This part refused to shut down. He had ignited a version of myself I didn't know I was missing, and now I held it like a delicate secret within me. 3 days went by in silence. There were no texts or invitations, and I wasn't really expecting any. I had convinced myself that some distance was necessary and folded that thought into my mind like a neatly pressed sheet, well organized and comforting. But by Thursday, that silence felt different. It was no longer just space. It became a heavy weight. There was an uncomfortable ache in my chest that grew more intense with every hour that passed without him reaching out. That evening, I found myself wandering without a clear destination. I walked through familiar streets that suddenly seemed strange. The shops, the streetlights, even the trimmed hedges appeared dull, as if they were mere background decorations in a life I didn't fully inhabit anymore. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as I absent-mindedly headed toward the park. I hadn't intended to go there. My feet simply led me. I found a bench under a row of trees that stood bare and still. The wind hinted that autumn was on its way, bringing the earthy scent of damp leaves and smoke from somewhere far away. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself and sat quietly, listening to the sounds of joggers, dogs, and laughter floating by. Then I spotted him. He was standing at the edge of the pond, hands in his pockets, gazing at the water in a way that felt painfully serene. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. But somehow he sensed me. Some invisible bond pulled him toward me. When our eyes finally met, he didn't smile. Instead, he approached without hesitation, sitting next to me, as if it was all prearranged, as if nothing had been left unsaid between us. "I didn't think I'd see you," he said. I looked at him, uncertain. "What brings you here?" He shrugged. "I come here sometimes. You know that." I wanted to call him a liar. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. I exhaled deeply, a sound that could have been a laugh or a sob, depending on how you looked at it. We sat in silence for a while. The sun began to lower in the sky, bathing his face in warm, golden light. He looked older, not because of years, but because of something deeper etched in his features, perhaps a longing or a kind of understanding. He was the first to break the quiet. "I'm leaving. At the end of next week, I got a job offer in Denver." Hearing this felt like a stone dropping into my stomach, rippling through me like a wave. "How long will it be?" I asked, but he just shook his head, not really sure. "Maybe forever," he said. I looked away, feeling a tightness in my throat. That was coming up fast. I wasn't planning to tell you, he continued. I thought it might be easier. I wanted to know, easier for whom, but he didn't respond. Instead, he took a folded note out of his coat pocket and held it between his fingers without giving it to me. If you want to see me again before I leave, he said, placing the note on the bench, that's up to you. I looked down at the note. The wind tried to pull it away, but I pressed my fingers down to hold it in place. He stood up slowly and said, I don't regret anything, but I don't want to be something else you have to hide. Then he walked away. I kept staring at the note without opening it right away. I sat there on the bench as the sky shifted to a deep purple and the street lamps started to glow. When I finally unfolded the note, it was straightforward, just an address, a time, and 3 words. No need for explanations. I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked home more slowly than usual. That night, I struggled to sleep. I lay next to my husband, listening to his steady breathing. I looked at his hand, resting on the blanket, the way his wedding ring created a gentle dip. I thought back to the last time we had stayed up late talking, the last time he had held me like he didn't want to let go. I wondered if he knew how much I had faded away while being right there beside him. The next morning, he kissed me goodbye before heading to work and asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with the note in front of me, tracing the handwriting over and over as if it might reveal something new. I had no idea if I would actually go, but I knew I couldn't pretend that seeing him didn't matter. Sometimes in life, moments come quietly, with no dramatic signs, just a clear understanding that whatever happens next, you've already crossed a line you can't go back from. That morning, sitting there at the kitchen table with his note, I realized I had reached that point. The paper felt warm in my hands, as if it still held some of his energy. His handwriting was familiar, neat, and slightly slanted. It didn't tremble. Mine would have. I read the address and the time again. Saturday at 4 o'clock. Just a single line. No emotions, no demands. It was an open door, but only slightly, leaving me the choice to step through on my own terms. For the rest of the day, I felt like I was moving underwater. I folded towels over and over, rearranging them multiple times. I wandered around the house, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. I didn't cry or panic. I just floated in my thoughts. What I experienced was hard to put into words, something that felt more like loss. It wasn't about losing something I had, but about saying goodbye to a part of myself I could never be again. I thought about not going, convincing myself it was just a passing fantasy, a moment I should keep to myself instead of chasing after. I pictured returning to the comfort of my familiar life, where everything felt muted and calm, like a marriage turned quiet over time. I wanted to forget what it felt like to be desired, without any strings attached. Yet, the more I visualized that life, the more trapped I felt. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband. He was reading, the light from the lamp creating soft shadows on his face. I observed as his lips moved slightly while he focused on the book, his hand resting on his leg with one finger between the pages. I tried to remember what it felt like to touch him without measuring my feelings against someone else's. I attempted to bring back the warmth we once shared, and surprisingly, I found it, a distant memory, but still vivid. I recalled our early days together. His breath against my skin, his voice shaky as he whispered he didn't deserve me. When I turned off my lamp and rolled onto my side, he followed suit a few moments later, his arm brushing against mine. We didn't exchange any words. He kissed my shoulder, absent-mindedly, already drifting into sleep. I remained wide awake, listening to the rhythm of his breathing until dawn began to break. The next day, I planned out my actions carefully. I moved through my daily tasks, like a dance, grocery shopping, and replying to messages while taking longer pauses at stoplights than needed. I didn't glance at the note again. I didn't need to, since the address was imprinted in my mind. When Saturday came, I told my husband I needed some time alone, saying I was going to an art exhibit and maybe a bookstore afterward. He kissed my forehead and told me to take my time, so I did. I drove out of town in silence, without music or a GPS. The road felt familiar, even if the destination was new. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my stomach churned with something deeper than nerves. It was a need, a realization that this journey was no longer about him, but about me. The house was nestled quietly at the end of a wooded path. It was secluded, yet not completely isolated, a rental like our situation, temporary. As I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunched beneath my tires. I stayed parked for a minute, engine off and the key still in my hand, gathering my thoughts before stepping out. When I reached the door, he opened it before I could knock. We didn't speak immediately. He stepped aside, letting me pass into a room filled with soft, filtered light. It was a simple space, a couch, a few books stacked on a table, and a partly packed bag by the window. It didn't feel lived in yet, much like this moment felt, new and uncertain. He didn't try to make everything seem better than it was, and that brought me some peace. For a moment, he stood behind me without touching, just breathing softly. "I didn't think you'd come," he finally said. "I almost didn't," I replied. "But you did," he added. I turned to look at him. "Yes." The quiet between us felt different now. It wasn't heavy or filled with doubt. Instead, it was packed with all the unspoken words that didn't need to be said anymore. I sat on the edge of the couch, and he sat down next to me, keeping a respectful space between us. His hand rested on the cushion, palm down, open, like he was inviting me to something rather than demanding it. "I'm not sure what this means," I admitted. "Me neither," he responded. "I don't know what happens after today." "I won't ask you to figure it out," I said. We lingered in that moment, our presence grounding us. Eventually, I leaned back and took a deep breath. I've never done this before, I confessed, lied, or chosen my own path. His smile was gentle, tinged with sadness. Then he reached out and took my hand. His thumb glided softly over my wrist, just like he had touched my jaw in the kitchen long before everything changed. "I want you to know," he said, "this doesn't have to turn into something else for it to matter." "But it already matters," I said. "That's the issue." He kissed me, and it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady and sure. I kissed him back. Later, we lay together on the couch, our legs intertwined, not speaking. My head rested on his chest, while his fingers brushed lightly over my arm in gentle strokes. We didn't mention the future or goodbyes. We simply enjoyed being together in that moment. At one point, he asked if I wanted to spend the night. I shook my head. "I need to go home." He didn't push back. He walked me to my car, his hand resting comfortably on my lower back, as if it always belonged there. The sky was dark, resembling bruised fruit, full and heavy. I opened my car door, paused, and looked up at him. "Will you call me?" I asked. "If you want me to," he replied. I didn't answer. I just got inside, closed the door, and drove away. That night, I returned home to find the porch light on, and my husband waiting for me with a gentle kiss and a question about dinner. I answered him, smiled, and asked about his day. As I slipped into bed beside him, my body still felt warm from being close to someone else. For the first time, I didn't feel torn in two. I felt whole, even if just for a moment. I used to think returning home meant I could erase everything that had happened. I believed stepping back into this life, this house, this marriage would somehow erase the memory of him. It felt like the absence of him could wipe out everything we had. But I've learned that's not true. You don't come back the same. You bring things with you, quiet, unseen reminders of what you experienced. A look, a warmth, or the lingering shape of a name you don't say out loud anymore. You somehow found a way to fit your feelings into the tiny moments in between making the bed and pouring your morning coffee, like secrets hidden in your heart. The next few days felt like the most ordinary days I'd experienced in months, but they were also incredibly hard to bear. The kitchen was filled with the scent of basil and dish soap, while the radio played its usual low-key news updates. My husband talked about books I hadn't read and movies I hadn't seen. I responded with nods, half-hearted replies, and carefully placed smiles. I didn't lie, not really. I just let the quiet moments convey more than the actual words. But in those silent spaces, I held on to the last image of him standing in the doorway of the place we rented. His hand was still warm from mine, and his expression was so still, as if he were trying to remember something he was too afraid to ask me for. I hadn't told him to call me, but I hadn't told him not to either. In the end, he didn't reach out. I convinced myself this was for the best. We had shared everything that needed to be said. That moment had passed, or at least it had settled like dust in a room that hadn't been touched for ages. One afternoon, my friend's mother called me. Her voice was familiar, warm and lively, always keeping the conversation flowing smoothly. "He's gone," she said. "The job in Denver came through. He packed up over the weekend and left by Monday. You knew, right?" "Yes," I answered a bit too quickly. "Are you okay?" she asked. It felt like a strange question, since I wasn't the one who was saying goodbye. "I'm fine," I replied. She paused before adding, "He said you were kind to him." There was something in her tone that wasn't accusing or prying. It was just there, hanging in the air. I mulled over her words and finally said, "I hope so." I tried to be. We wrapped up the call with no special goodbye. She didn't push me for more, but her words lingered in my mind for hours after. "You were kind to him." I almost wanted to chuckle because kind didn't quite capture what I felt. It didn't fit the way I had touched him, how I had longed for him, or how I had taken from him. Yet, maybe it was true, because I had never tried to possess him. I only wanted to be with him in that sacred place where neither of us owned the other, and everything felt like an invitation to truly live. A week passed, and then another. He didn't call, and I didn't reach out. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was just that what we had created couldn't morph into something else. It was not meant to survive distance or translation. It existed in that one fleeting season, intense, illuminating, and fully rich, even in its gaps. One evening, my husband found me sitting outside, holding a glass of wine long after the sun had set. He stepped onto the porch and leaned against the railing, observing me silently for a moment. "You've changed," he said softly. I looked up at him. How do I explain this? I thought to myself. There was a change in the air, a stillness that didn't feel sad. It just felt different. I stayed silent, unsure of how to respond. I had so much to share, and yet nothing at all. I wanted him to know he hadn't done anything wrong, that the feeling I'd lost was something I hadn't even realized I was missing until it returned. He sat next to me and took my hand. "I know I've let things slip," he said. "I thought you liked the silence. I thought we were doing fine." "We were," I replied, "and maybe we still are." He nodded, concern on his face. "I just don't want to lose you," he added. I looked at him. He seemed weary, not from age or work, but from seeking something in me that I wasn't showing him anymore. "You haven't lost me," I reassured him, and I meant it, even though I realized he hadn't fully found the real me either. I felt like I belonged to moments now, not just one place. I had started choosing my lingerie with care, knowing it might never be seen. When I entered a room, I felt my body in a new way, focusing on how it felt instead of how it looked. My touch with my husband wasn't just out of obligation anymore. It became a choice, slow and intentional, even if my mind occasionally wandered. That night, we made love. I was more present than I had been in months. Afterward, he cried quietly, tears spilling down his face. He held me tighter than usual, as if he sensed something had changed in a way we couldn't name. I let him hold me, allowing him to believe whatever story he needed. Later, alone in the bathroom, I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, which only showed the outskirts of my body. I didn't hate myself. I just didn't feel a stronger love for myself either, but I understood who I was. That weekend, I strolled past the park where we had once met by chance. The leaves were starting to fall, crisp and bent at the edges. I found myself sitting on the same bench we had shared, almost without thinking. No one awaited me there, yet I could still feel him in a way that wasn't romantic, but instead filled the open space in my heart that had emerged when he first said, "Careful driving." I whispered softly, just so the wind could hear, "Thank you, not for the affair, but for bringing me back to myself, even if only for a moment."